All right, good morning. It's great to be with you here today. You know, the gathering of kindred spirits, the gathering for learning and for networking. I've learned the value of that. That's incredibly valuable. So meet as many people as you can, learn as much as you can, and I'm learning as well. So what a great opportunity to gather. So my topic today is about a book that actually is being published and coming out in a couple months or so. But my background is 25 years with employers, always with kind of a continuous improvement mindset. And the first 2/3 was change management, culture, transformation. And then I kind of was always around healthcare, but started focusing a lot in healthcare as I took a role as the VP of HR with Meryl Steele. And we started a journey that led to places I never would have imagined. But in that time, I was searching for, started out with kind of individual activities like starting an on-site clinic, an on-site MRI, and a mobile clinic that traveled 30-mile radius to the homes. And so kind of individual actions, but as we started to connect those dots, those actions became this strategy that began to tell a narrative and began to tell a story and began to save big dollars while adding a lot of no-cost healthcare for our employees. So I'm actually kind of surprised I'm standing right here at this moment. I never would have saw that coming, but here I am, and I'm having fun. I think it's a great opportunity and it's an obligation that we need to do for our country as well. So, but the book is The Employer Healthcare Success Formula. Don't Feed the Beast is kind of the catchy name. We'll see what that means. And these are the steps. So over the last 7-8+ years, I've been formulating how can an employer take steps to transform their healthcare. And this is, in my opinion, this is it. The book, of course, gets into a lot more detail than I will be able today. But I'd like to take a quick, just kind of show of hands. It's my understanding there's about 75 people here, so about 25% of the audience is employers. And then, and this talk will relate to the employer-sponsored health plan, so all those who swim in that pond. But the employers are especially key because if the employers don't get in the game, right, then nothing else can happen thereafter. So really, really critical. But just show of hands, when we're talking about success stories, right, and it's a little bit maybe loose definition, so I don't want to get too detailed, but if we say, okay, the plan saved notable money and increase the quality and say for 2 or 3 years, some sustainability with it. How many know of one employer success story? Just show of hands. Okay. How about 3 employer success stories? Okay, already getting sparse here. 5, right? Okay, so you see my point, right? So aren't we all here today to build employer success stories, right? We all support that in some way, whether you're a physician, whether you're a broker, whether you're an employer themselves, and all the other folks that support. That's really what makes this movement go. And so I just want to kind of make that point. The book I'm really excited about. It's interesting, you do a search on Amazon, and it's like, do a search for leadership, and it's like, 400,000 hits and stuff. And so I realized as this was going, as I was writing it, but this is only the second book of its kind. And so maybe that reveals another problem we have, right? So if you want to learn about this, you go to conferences like this. And I had tons of meetings with brokers, and they were trying to sell my account. And I told them I wasn't shopping at the time. I would be later. I didn't know it, but I was like a sponge, right? So I didn't know what I know today 8 years ago, even though I was in HR for 25 years, right? There's another angle of learning here, but there's no textbook. There's no college class. Talked a little bit with UW in Wisconsin about a college course that might be happening. But this is the second book of its kind so it's from an employer perspective of the person who led the journey with the employer who had a success story. The only second that I'm aware of, I actually know the other one. It's called The Company That Solved Healthcare, John Torinas and Sarah Graff. He actually is in Wisconsin. He's 85 years old. He keynotes the events we have there. I found that kind of interesting. So I think this will educate everyone, and it really goes into depth. So hopefully it's valuable for our country for that. All right. So the chapters kind of take those formula steps, and then they break in and delve into the details. So this is a newer share for me in terms of this talk, and so I actually made this chart yesterday. You can see how much I was tweaking it. Drew this up, so I don't know if it's dialed, perfect yet, but I think I was just trying to tell a story, and I don't know if you're like me, I'm a child at heart, so I like pictures. I like cartoon pictures, so bear with me, but I think that's more fun than trying to put everything, a whole page full of words. I've always found that the pictures are easier to understand. So, this is the longest chapter in the book, and so, before we can solve a problem, we really need to take the time intentionally to understand that problem in detail. It's maybe not the funnest part, we're ready to get to work, we're ready to do things, but we got to understand it well. And so that's one of the things that I do in that chapter is, 20 plus years of unsustainability. That's the key word. If you ask me to pick one word about the future of our healthcare right now, it's unsustainable. 10, 20, 30, 50, I've seen even 100% in 1 year. It's not sustainable. We've got to change something, right? And so we can talk about how and why. But one of the interesting things is you say, okay, who's winning in this past 20 years? Who's winning and who's losing? And so what's interesting is the left side there, the employer and the employees are the buyers of healthcare, right? Including us in this room. We're actually buyers as well, and even if we're providers or whatever our roles may be, employers. But they're the payers of all healthcare, and then we watch where the money flows. So who's winning? If you look, the industry is actually winning really big, some more than others, right? So we find ourselves with a situation where we have a win-lose outcome. And win-lose outcomes are never sustainable. They're never sustainable. The lose side cannot lose forever. It's just the way it works. And so we have to find a win-win. If you follow some of that money, you notice I've drawn tables in there, right? So we have over-the-table money, that's visible money, and then we have under-the-table money. The under-the-table money needs to get on top of the table. That's one of the, right? All these influencing things. We have, sometimes what I'll refer to in the book as traditional brokers and then brokers. It's just a simple way to the distinction between, we have a lot of brokers here today, and I hope that you're what would be labeled as a broker or consultant, right? Or you're moving toward that. Sometimes you inherit things, and that's okay, and this isn't good, the comp's not aligned, right? But when I look back at the Merrill Steele story, I realized I did this before a CAA even come out, and I requested the comp, and I want all the money you're making off of our plan. And the CFO had looked at me, he's like, you can't do that. I'm like, we need to do that. That's nothing, right? I know it's out of the box, but we need to do that. And so I found that we were paying, the total comp, we were paying about 1/3. The company was paying 1/3 for services to support us, but 2/3 of their total income was coming from the other side. You see a problem there, right? So the phrase, we work for those who pay us, we were paying them, and insurance was paying them, but insurance was paying them twice what we were paying. So when I look at partners and I say, why aren't they coming with me? Why am I pulling them along? And well, there might be various reasons, but that's one of them. And just kind of one point here before I move on to the next one. What's interesting about this chart, and maybe just to make this point, all these arrows represent flow of money, right? Where's the single source of this money, right? The buyer, the employer, and that's the only place this money comes from. So as employers, one of the things you'll hear me say is we need to actively manage the health plan. We need to understand where our money's going and all the under the table and the kickbacks on the kickbacks and right? So it's really important. It's one of the things is just begin to, instead of delegating that to anyone, start actively managing that. One of the experiences, you ever had kind of a revelation where you've done something forever? I'd done something for 15 years and then one morning it's like something hits you. Well, I was leading the custodial team at Merrill Steele, and every company's like this, by the way. This is just an example, but in the vacuum broke. We had this push vacuum, and it had a wide, head on it, but it broke. So we needed a new one. So we called the sales rep, and we had a purchasing process. Every company I've ever worked for, I've been around, has always had a purchasing process. Maybe you have one, right, where you have to get 3 quotes, kind of like the insurance examples we were talking about. And then I have to write up a summary and show why I'm recommending this one. And so it's in the afternoon, and I was writing this up, and I'm like, man, this doesn't feel like a great use of my time. It's really obvious this is the vacuum. You're going to make me write all this up and get all these quotes. And I thought I had just signed something that morning for stop loss, and I didn't go through this process. And guess how much it was? $700,000, right? So here I was for like $350 taking my afternoon. And so I said, why isn't this on the radar? Why isn't healthcare viewed as a purchase? It's maybe viewed as a benefit or something. Why isn't this viewed as a purchase? It's a huge purchase, second or third of an employer typically. So we got to get that thing on the radar, and then we got to change our mindset. Instead of saying what's insurance cover and our premiums go way high because we never looked at the total price, let's shop for healthcare. Let's start to be consumers. Let's shop. That's really the theme of the winning strategy, right? Is to enable your plan and your members to shop for healthcare. So lessons from the big three, an interesting analogy here. My grandmother used to say to my grandpa, she'd say, you have Cadillac taste and a Chevy income, right? And he liked those big cars, those big cars from that generation. You'd hit a pothole and not even know it. And they were pretty, smooth cars, if you will. And that was what they loved. But you think about if you spend more and you get a Cadillac, right? What's the thought there? Well, there's a value proposition. I spend more and I get more, right? If we look at the American healthcare situation today, we're buying a Chevy at a Cadillac price. Nothing wrong with Chevy. I restore old Chevy trucks, right? But I'm not even sure it's a Chevy. It's something else, right? But the value proposition is imbalanced. And so how do we get that? Because it's because of a suppression of the free market, that the market doesn't allow shopping. We see consolidation of hospitals. We see two main reasons why the market's suppressed. One is the network. You can only shop here, and if you don't like it, you still have to shop here, right? And then you don't see the prices or quality, which also means you can't shop. So those two things, when we open the free market, those two things get freed up. And healthy competition comes into play, and everyone has to get better. So this analogy, this was a chart, by the way, that I drew, if you like my cartoon pictures, but at Merrill Steel, where I said, this is our current, right? There's no exits, and you're in your network, and right, you sign for the 40% discount, and I'll sign the narrow network. I don't even know what the unit price is. I realize that too, right? We should know the unit price. 40%, maybe not all that valuable, but we're not shopping. We got these one-lane highways. And so I reflect back on the auto industry. I have a background in the auto industry. I had started out with an auto supplier and was recruited to Toyota, where they started up a huge plan, 8,000 team members in Kentucky, and 3,000 cars, near perfect cars, rolled off the line every 24 hours. Pretty amazing. But I got to know this general manager at the time, was named Ken. He was he was near his retirement, but he had spent his whole life in the auto industry. He was like 6'6" and a linebacker on his college football team, and we just became friends. And he began to share stories with me. He was a first-line supervisor. Back in 65, the big three, if you will, had something like 85% market share. So they were working alongside, kind of similar to here as you see this diagram. They were working alongside one another, but those were mainly the options. There were a small few others. But they weren't really heavily competing. They all kind of, even if they didn't have good quality, they kind of sold enough cars and they kept going, right? But there wasn't really healthy competition going on. They were just kind of there. And so he told me stories. He said, Matt, I'm on the first line with the UAW. It wasn't easy to work with then. They're smoking pot on the line. They would leave in the middle of the day, come back at the end, go to the bar, come back at the end of the day and clock out. And half the cars, they would turn his steel desk, which was on the plant floor, they turned upside down when they got mad at him. Or worse, bricks through your windshield or something. Pretty difficult environment. He said half the cars rolling off the line started. Half. It didn't mean they were junk. It meant that missing parts, so they threw them in the front seat and then they'd fix them. It's they didn't stop the line. They didn't see the value of the first-time quality. So there weren't lean processes. Well, Toyota comes in at a joint venture with, they called it New Me in California. Really fascinating story if you want to read about that. But then in roughly 87, I think it was, they started the Georgetown, their flagship facility, 1,300 acres, 150 acres under roof, a monstrous facility. The Toyota cars started running 200,000, 300,000 miles, and it forced, right? You have a new player in the market. And then others came in too, right, over time. But we start to see this free market, suppressed market maybe, or limited market open up. And today, if you look at what we have for the auto options today, right, what we witnessed was the effective disruption of a suppressed market. And we're all better for it today. And so I think the same thing can happen in healthcare if we open up this free market. So on the strategy piece here, before we move on, there's 3 parts. As I see it, 3 parts to a healthcare strategy. Often it's maybe not voiced this way. It's kind of not known like it should be. So first is financial. There's a couple themes here. Like I said, go really deep in the book. But all dollars need to be on the table. If you're the buyer, don't you want to see where your money's going? And by the way, I didn't point it out on that one chart, but even employers' money, even your premium dollars are actually going to lobbyists to make your premiums go higher. So actually, ironically, some of our premium money, if you look at the very end, some of our premium money is actually working against us. That's discomforting, right? So, but there's 3 parts. So financial, all dollars on the table, and then just choosing, trying to get level funded or trying to get self-funded, so that if you do well, then that you get some money back, or you get to keep your money, then you can have more control over your health plan. And the medical part, so as I call the medical part, a lot of discussion. That's kind of the focus why we're here today. Much of why we're here today, right? We have tons of physicians in the room and tons of care providers, and but we have to look at, as some have mentioned, how we shop for healthcare. We have to be able to shop for healthcare, right? So this actually, have you ever heard an employer say, or heard a story? Yeah, we went self-funded for a year or 2, and then it didn't work, so we went back. Like, okay, I get really frustrated when I hear that story, because I think there's a misunderstanding. Yeah, but so you changed the way you funded your plan, but did you change the way you purchased healthcare? Because if you didn't, why would you expect to get better? Right? So at Merrill Steel, we had really fun examples. We put in a plug for an MRI, and we had our on-site clinic, but we would we could pull the truck up within a day's notice, same semi that went to the hospital, and we could get an MRI for $5-something, say $600. If that same truck drove to the hospital 15 minutes later, that same MRI would cost you $5,000. Same truck. So those kinds of examples, right? So we shop wisely for healthcare. We spend less, and then you can expect better results. And then the greatest outcome in the medical side, if we spend less in the whole year, guess what? We can lower premiums next year. Then you talk about buy-in. Well, there's your buy-in, right? Everybody will come along with you if you can lower premiums. That's what eats up your paycheck before you even think about healthcare. And then trustworthy partners is the next last step there, which is its own chapter. So there was a winter morning as I was just kind of beginning this story. I couldn't sleep. I woke up like 5 a.m. I'm all excited about all these things. And so I drive into work, and it said negative 23 if you're not from the Midwest, but negative 23 in my car. That I'll never forget it, right? That was a cold morning, a little brisk. And so, but I'm there in the office, and our shop started early at 5. They're all going, sparks are flying, weld flashes, but the office is pretty quiet, pretty dark. I'm sitting there, and I look up at my blank whiteboard, pour myself a cup of coffee, and I thought to myself, partners are really key. I'm frustrated with some of our partners. And so I'd like to say this was really a strategic idea, but I wasn't even awake yet. But I got out of my chair, and I wrote all of our partners on the board, and I started to ask some simple questions with them. I said, do they understand that there's a problem in healthcare? Are they willing to change? Are they willing to help make this go? And the unfortunate answers that I got to those questions I asked myself was no for every single one, except for the DPC that I had just contracted with like a month prior. And so at that moment, I realized that I was going to have to change all of my partners, because we didn't have trustworthy relationships. That there was an imbalance, there was a win-lose, and I couldn't get them to change to find a win-win. And so it wasn't easy, but over the next couple of years, we facilitated that change and then enabled ourselves to win. If we wouldn't have done it, we wouldn't have been able to win. And so an interesting point, I still utilize this thinking today, but new partnerships, right? So you think about, one thing I like to say, people probably get tired of me saying it, but it's really, really important, right? So we have to create this win-win. So like we kind of get in this habit, it's like, I'll get them down to the lowest price possible. Okay, nothing wrong with that. But how about we just say, you know what I say? Really upfront. You give me a fair price, and by the way, I'll know if it's not fair, because I shop, I know. But just give me a fair price that works for you. We'll play no games. We'll build trust from the start. And 1 year from now, if you're not winning or I'm not winning, one of us is going to get out. We might be able to adjust. But why don't we just set up this agreement today where 1 year we smile and say, wow, this is working well. You're winning, I'm winning. What if we could prevent that problem later, right? And we just have this trust in the relationship. And I think a lot of that is missing with the partnerships from employers today. So, right, whichever role you're in, think about that trust and build that strong. And there's nothing more powerful than that. I believe it's the glue for relationships. So the next chapter, the next step in the formula, right? One of the key things, change management. Anybody cringe when I say that phrase, right? It's like, no. A lot of people don't like this. A lot of people don't like change management. And it's actually what I went to school for. It's one of my passions. It's what I've been doing for 25 years, whether it's culture transformation or whether it's healthcare. I'm just wired that way, right? And I'm wired in a way that I'm not having fun unless I can fix something or make it better. So not sure where I got that, but that's a bit of who I am. So we start to look at this research, right? So one of the things I didn't mention on the formula, how did I make this formula? How did I come up with this? Well, after we had led our story at Merrill Steel, I got to know there's 6 total success stories in the state of Wisconsin. And when you start analyzing them, I got to know the leaders. I know them well now. They speak at our events there. We can draw 100 people. We're starting doing the same kind of gathering and networking and learning in Wisconsin. But what I realized, their strategy was not identical, but the themes were the same. They were shopping. They had enabled their plan and their members to shop for healthcare. And that was their secret. So the formula is taken from success stories, not just of Merrill Steel, but all these companies, and has been proven and proven. There's one school district that saved over $10 million in 10 years, right? And we're hearing a lot, I don't know, each state's different. We're hearing school districts doing referendums, cutting programs, cutting teachers. You know what they're doing? They're saving programs and building buildings by doing these things for healthcare and keeping the best teachers because they've done a lot of activity in healthcare. So there can be amazing results from that. But one of the best practices that you see in all this research, right, there's always been an internal champion inside. It's somebody who just said they took the reins, maybe they read The Price We Pay, or maybe they went to an event like this and they got inspired and they said, we're going to do this thing. And they just, right, they led it. They got the right support and they became a transformational leader. So there's probably other words we can use, change agent, but when I say transformational leader, I don't mean some kind of grandiose, selfish thing. I mean somebody who, when they lead, they can transform. They can take it from here to there. So any transformational kind of spirits in the room that are like, yeah, I like to fix stuff. I like to, right? So it's not easy, by the way, but sometimes maybe we're wired that way a little bit. But to fix the healthcare of an employer, I think you're going to need one. Maybe you can designate someone who you can designate an up-and-comer. Don't even have to have worked in benefits before. But somebody needs to be the internal champion who, with the right support, who's going to transform that. And I use Roger's adoption curve here, right? So he did some research and he found that we all kind of fall into these categories. And you can see the bell curve, who's going to go first, who's going to go second, right? So when a transformational leader starts, that person is alone. And then they gain other support, and they get 1 or 2. They might get the CEO, the president. They might get somebody from a different department on the shop floor, whatever the business is. And they're just accumulating support, and they're gathering more and more people as you go, right? So then the early adopters join in. Yeah, we like the narrative. You've got a clear and compelling narrative. Why are we doing this, and what's it for, and what happens if we don't do it? Those kinds of things, right? Early majority joins in, late majority eventually. Laggards actually never join in. They kind of just unwillingly come along and eventually have a new norm, right? But that's the pain, if you will, of change management, but the incredible opportunity of change management. So are you willing to do that, or do you have someone who's willing to do that? Because if no one steps up to do that, we got what we got. So I'm fascinated by that topic, the transformational leadership. And then, of course, a wise strategy, right? I mean, you gotta have a good strategy, but good strategy without this is actually the reason that most change transformations fail, is they lose the support of the people, or you get in the desert middle, as I refer to it. Things get really bumpy, and everyone's like, screw this, we're going back. But yeah, going back to broken, but right, we had enough. And so That's the hardest part of the journey, is getting through those stages. So, all right. The last step before the outcome is 4P alignment. And so this is sometimes it's assumptions, but partners, providers, and patients, educating patients how to use this plan, right? Bringing in the doctors and physicians and NPs and all those providing the care, making sure they have the same answer. A lot of these players in the game, they could have won. They know how to win, right? You've chosen good partners, but you got to all be playing out of the same playbook. Imagine if a football team was all playing out of their own opinion or their different playbook. Even if they're great players, it wouldn't go well. And so they got to be a well-oiled machine. The name on the front of the jersey is more important than the name on the back, right? We got to play as a team. And then the outcome is, Keith spoke on this last year, but this simple notion of win-win, positive sum. So if we put that into numbers, a lose is -1. A win's +1, right? So -1 plus +1 is 0. That's not a sustainable win. We need a +1 and a +1. So one of the things I like to make the point of is the industry's winning, the employers and employees are losing. We don't want to reverse that, because that's flip the win-lose to lose-win. That doesn't help anybody. It's not sustainable. We have to find a way for everyone to win. It could be creating a new outpatient system like we're doing. But maybe the hospitals come along, been talking to hospitals, hey, come on over, open up this free market, right? So not against anyone, only really standing for values like transparency and fairness and great care, right? So trying not to make any enemies along the way, but really opening up the free market is a healthy competition. So I'd like to close just on a personal note. It looks like I've got the little timer here, I got 3 minutes. So, but just to kind of maybe, right? We're all healthcare professionals in some way, right? We all have different roles in this game and this movement here to fix American healthcare. So just to share a few personal stories, one of the things that's interesting, I used to observe culture, still do. I've had 3 medical experiences recently where I observed, right, is it patient-focused care or profit-focused care? First one, my dad passed away in a rural Iowa hospital about a month ago. Went to see him, had a chance to see him for a few days. But I'll tell you, this little hospital, and I researched them and their prices, and they even have a quote tool on their website, and the prices were amazing. But just the caregivers were awesome. We had 10 or 12 people gathered around him in ICU. The rule is like 2 or 3. And and the nurse is half tripping over us that she's doing great care. You know what? And they put us first, and then they put my dad first. I apologized to the nurse, and I said, I'm so sorry. I'll slide out of your way, right? She's trying to get in a drawer. She looked at me and she said, the more the merrier. She was empowered to do that. The doctors had the same attitude all the way from the top in that hospital, and their prices were fair, right? A patient-focused hospital, maybe less common today. The second is my wife and I are foster parents, and we had taken a baby. We take babies home from the hospital that are addicted to drugs, and we have one that's 2.5. She's not adopted yet, but she was admitted she was lethargic and was having respiratory issues. Took her to the hospital that's covered by the state care, and they admitted her. It was kind of a surprise. Okay, we'll make sure she's good. And then so she spent the night, and I got a text at 4 a.m. the next morning. My wife had spent the night in the hospital with her, and it said, we're being air flighted to another hospital 30 minutes away. Wow, I was starting to get scared. This is getting serious. And then I talked to her, and she's like, no, it's not. It wasn't really emergent. It wasn't that bad. And so, but even the receiving hospital asked, why did you med flight the baby, right? Even they were asking, this isn't urgent. And the sending hospital's answer, there were no ambulances available at 4 a.m. on a Monday morning. So I don't know much about ambulance care, but it doesn't feel like, right? I don't know, but just kind of some question marks. Were they patient-focused? Were they profit-focused? So, quick story. And then if you know me a little bit, this is actually the introduction in great detail in the book, but I was run over by a tractor several years ago now, a 4,000-pound tractor. I was working in my backyard and pulling up trees off the 40-foot bluff down to the mighty Wisconsin River. And over a series of events, I found myself under that tractor, rolling directly over my chest, and my restored tractor rolling into the river, and me, being thrashed down to the river's edge and then being really beat up. So that's how I looked afterward. I had 5 broken ribs. I had a shoulder that was semi-dislocated. I had a couple of fingers, lots of long list. But my experience going into ER, I was even hesitant to go on. My family's like, you need to go. I have a friend who's an ER doctor. You need to go, right? You could be bleeding internally. And so I did. And I had a bunch of CAT scans. I think I'm still glowing from it. But I was waiting at the desk when my daughter rolled me in, and then the attendant wouldn't look at me. And I was waiting, and then she made me sign forms. And I'm like, I just got ran over by a tractor. I could be bleeding internally. I need care right away. Right, I'm waiting here. So, and then I tried not to have to spend the night, but I was too nauseated. So then the next morning, a physical therapist had stopped by, and he said, I have to do this, Matt. And it was just 3 or 4 minutes. And he said, asked me some questions, and he was off. I said, I have care. I have care already. We were building our plan. I have it, no cost. I don't need your services. And then the bill was almost $20,000. And I had no procedures done, just testing. And part of that bill was $387 for physical therapy. And when I tried to dispute it, it didn't work so well. They made me feel like I was the one out of line. So I've had some of my own, and I was hurt. I was badly hurt, and I paid it. I drained my savings and my HSA. But that's the tractor being pulled out. So, sometimes, so what's my point in sharing this, right? So is the caregiver, is the hospital, is it patient-focused or is it provider-focused? And just to kind of make the point, right, we're all here as medical professionals, healthcare professionals, but isn't this a little bit personal as well? We're talking about our families, we're talking about our communities, and we're talking about ultimately our country, and this becomes a little personal. So I hope you're in the game with me. We're driving this forward in Wisconsin, but it takes people like us to make this go. So here's my contact information. I thank you for your time today.